From overcoming issues with their water license and their claims to watching as their competitors overtake them with new and improved equipment, here is how Tony Beets was taken out by the U.S. government. While Parker Schnabel took it all, the search for gold in the Klondike can be quite challenging, especially when you just can't catch a break. Just take a look at Tony Beets, who is forced to watch as his entire gold mining empire seems to be crumbling to pieces right before his very eyes. What can he do due to the inspectors who want to shut him down at the Indian River claim because of his old wash plants and other equipment? It seems as though his hands are tied just when he thought he was going to have the season of a lifetime. Tony now has to wonder if he would ever be able to get his hands on that sweet gold ever again. Even worse, he's forced to watch that upstart Parker Schnabel have what could prove to the best year of his career is the reign of the so-called king of the Klondike coming to an end. Join us as we watch Tony Beets navigate some of the many issues that could bring his season to a disastrous end. It seems as though Tony and his crew were in for hell when they realized that they were coming face to face to many disasters in the course of the season. The first thing that occurred was that inspectors suddenly showed up so that they could shut his operation down at the Indian River. Claims just had the inspector over, and guess what? I guess I better learn how to read because we missed something in the license. And what did we miss? Apparently for a Class 3, I can only strip a very small area. So that means that's all we can lose. This was due to the fact that he had certain issues with his water license, with such a huge problem acting as a hindrance to Tony's operations. He and his team knew that they were in for one heck of a season. Imagine Tony and his team set out to mine about 15 acres of land out there with these hitches in place. Now they were not even sure that they were going to be able to mine 1 acre. Such a letdown, right? As you can imagine, not only was Tony angry about the entire situation, his entire crew seemed to experience a loss in morale. It must have felt like an even bigger slap in the face for Tony and his team when they heard that Parker, Tony's young rival, was making a ton of progress with his team. Due to Parker's careful planning, it looked as though success was only a matter of time, and as such it stood out in stark contrast against the old methods that Tony used to approach his work at the Indian River claim. As if that wasn't bad enough, things looked to get worse as the Indian River claim began to flood. As such, they were well behind schedule because they had to take time to pump the water out, so no license. This season is pretty well down the tube. Down there, what did they say? Rewrite a whole bunch of then submit it, Lord. On top of everything, Tony had to deal with the fact that they needed to fix up his biggest wash plant. As you can imagine, this was a massive headache for Tony and his team to overcome. Understandably, Tony and his team were even more upset about the many setbacks they were experiencing, but at the end of the day, they also knew that they had to get to work. Sure, progress seemed to be slow, but before they knew it, the wash plant came back to life. Unfortunately, this was not the end of their many problems. Just as they had to deal with another problem with their setup, they were dealt something of a killer blow when the inspectors arrived to tell them that they couldn't carry on with their work if they didn't have the required water license. As you can imagine, the team's morale was almost smothered at this point. Despite how hard they worked, it looked as though they were not going to reap the fruits of their efforts. With that in mind, they figured that the only way they were going to make anything out of this season was to return to Paradise Hill. This alternative was already hard enough to accept because the site had been left idle for quite a long time. As such, it was already an uphill task to get the site up and running, not to even talk about making any profits from it. With time running out to make things work, they couldn't help but look over their shoulders with envy at Parker and his operation as it ran smoothly and efficiently. There was every chance that Parker and his crew was going to enjoy one of their most successful seasons ever. How annoying. Nonetheless, they knew that they had to get back to work. At that point, they had to figure out how to overcome their biggest problem, water management. Without a steady supply of water, how on earth were they going to maintain the seamless mining process? They needed to get to work. As they worked around this problem, the team performed admirably, withstanding an unimaginable amount of stress and pressure. Anyway, 9,000 ounces, that's now a long ways away, of course, but I mean, if we get a couple hundred a week here and out, so we'll just give the mill indeed everything that they seem to be experiencing put Tony's claim to be the king of the Klondike in jeopardy. Well, as they say, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Despite how problematic the situation seemed to be, the team somehow pushed on to extract some gold from the mines. Sure, it wasn't what they had set out to get, but each nugget of gold seemed to represent some sort of trophy or triumph. Somehow it almost gave them a sense of hope that they would be able to make the most of this horrific season. After all, if Parker could do it, why couldn't they? Before long, the team realized that they were approaching the final weeks of this season. The entire season almost seemed to be a blur to them, especially as they had worked so hard to get the operation at Paradise Hill up and running. Sure, it was a difficult task, but they knew that they could not give up if they were going to get anything out of this season. They were going to have to put one heck of a shift in. Alas, nothing they could do could bring the claims back to what it was in its heyday. The challenges of the Indian River claims were just too much to overcome at that point in time, and as such they were not able to achieve everything that they had hoped to achieve at the beginning of the season. Despite this, they pushed on and faced their challenges head-on. Sure, they had seen more success in the past, but everyone knows that you cannot win every time, king of the Klondike or not. Sometimes you're just going to have to take some kicks. This is especially the case for someone like Tony Beets, who was known to take many risks. He was just going to have to find a way to overcome his many problems. Suffice it to say, the plan to move to the Indian River claim did not solve all the problems faced by Tony Beets and his team. We're putting all our equipment, all our iron into the Paradise. There's not going to be any in your river ever. We're going to give it get as much stripped and opened up as we possibly can. The flooded land and the rusty old wash plant that Tony and his team used just didn't help the situation at all, as they lost money alongside other resources. You couldn't blame Tony and his team for feeling more frustrated than ever. Add that problematic water license issue, which limited their mining land from 15 acres to 1 acre to the mix, and it's fair to say that their chances of success were little to none as they dealt with all these problems. Parker and his team were pushing on with their goal to achieve what could prove to be a record-breaking season. With his state-of-the-art equipment and his precise planning, Parker and his team were the envy of all miners, including Tony and his crew. The contrast was clear. While one crew was functioning seamlessly, the other was clunking on with outdated machines and problematic techniques. It's made even worse by the fact that progress seemed nowhere in sight, as Tony and his team were facing endless problems at the Indian River claim and their efforts to move their operations to Paradise Hill with their old and abandoned equipment. Making matters worse, the efforts to put them back into shape just added another element of delay to their operations. What a nightmare! Despite these issues, the team pushed on with their efforts to get their hands on that beautiful gold. Sure, it was some sort of progress, but it was still far from the 6,000 ounces of gold that they had hoped to get their hands on at the end of the season. As such, you can understand how everyone had to stomach the disappointment that they had experienced when they didn't reach their targets. It must have been even more annoying when they looked over at Parker and his crew with their advanced and well taken care of machines and their proper planning. They were digging out that gold as if it was nothing. If anything, this must have felt like a testament to the investments that Parker made towards state-of-the-art equipment for himself and his team. Thanks for getting this done. It's a nice Set up. I like the plan. I know there's always going to be a few quirks to work out, but I like it so far. Well, she's going to take some fine tuning, but it's washing rocks. Well, everyone must have been pleased, because it looked as though these investments were paying off. Tony and his team must have felt bitter to draw closer by the minute they had to come to terms with the fact that the Klondike had been evolving over the years, but they had failed to keep up with things. To make matters worse, they were forced to look at the success that Parker and his team were enjoying as a manifestation of those who had adapted to the changes that were taking place in the Klondike. Indeed, they just couldn't compete with Parker and the way he was thinking about the future. Such a lesson may be tough to stomach, but they had no other option. They just had to accept the fact that the only thing that is constant in this life is change, and that change had taken place right there on the Klondike. With that in mind, Tony and his team needed to get themselves together if they were going to make the most of the conditions at the Klondike. Their activities at the Indian River claims let them know how important it was for them to make sure that they were ready for what was to come. With the winter approaching, they were going to face many problems with their machines, from breakdowns to malfunctions. They had it all to do with their outdated wash plant, add the inability to get the spare parts that they needed, and couple that with the exhaustion and the depleting morale that was experienced by the members of Tommy's team. And there was no saying if they would ever overcome the problems that they were facing as they tried to make the most of what they had left in this season. Despite these problems, they just did all they could to push on. Maybe that is why they couldn't help but turn their attention to what they could make of Paradise Hill. Sure, it was also an uphill battle there, but the crew put their heads together so that they could get things running. That said, they could only come up with temporary solutions to these issues. They put a lot of work and effort in it so it would be nice to see that pay off. It's pretty much my own fault. They usually slice about a month earlier than this. Yep, that is a big thing, but I mean, hey, like we had Castle ready to go big time on this one. As you guys can tell, these quick fix solutions did not solve the deeper problems that they had with their operations. It was almost too sad to behold. If anything, it told us what leadership could do to bring the best out of their team. One team made use of the most efficient approaches, while the other was left far behind due to the failure to adapt to the times. Whatever the case may be, both sets of miners knew that as the season was coming to an end, they had it all to do. After all, they were still fighting to achieve their targets. As winter approached, the team did all they could to get their hands on all the pieces of gold that were available to them. Both teams were able to get their hands on all the best technology they could to make things work. They also made sure that they made the best plans for the next season. While one was trying to make sure they didn't experience the mistakes they made this season, the other was trying to become even more efficient than ever before. As such, one could see how, despite their standings, they were going to do all they could to dominate one another in the next year. Sure, this time Tony was forced to lick his wounds as Parker sought to expand his empire, but surely this was only a matter of time. If Tony was going to remain the king of the Klondike, he would have to do what he can to remain the dominant force. As both teams pushed on with their rush for gold, from overcoming issues with their water license and their claims to watching as their competitors overtake them with new and improved equipment. Here is how Tony Beets was taken out by the U.S. government, while Parker Schnabel took it all.